This episode is brought to you by the MJ family of companies. Whatever interests you in the cannabis community can be found at mj.com. Unique and original content updating you on the latest trends in marijuana legalization, businesses and executives that are disrupting the industry, along with recreational entertainment and the latest deals on the brands and products you love. Visit mj.com today. Welcome to the Pot Live Podcast. I'm your host, Lenny G, and I can't believe it. We've already broken through 100 episodes. We want to thank you, the listeners, thousands of you that have sent beautiful comments, beautiful notes to us. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoy it. This next year, we're going to bring you the thought leaders, entertainers, trailblazers, CEOs of all the cannabis companies you want to hear from. People that are inventing new products, people that are bringing this cannabis industry to the mainstream. We are going to offer you education, value, and entertainment. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. And we are back with the Pot Live Podcast. I'm your host, Lenny G. And today we have a repeat guest. He's always back every month or so, Mr. Matthew Carr. He is the chief trend strategist of the Oxford Club. You can also find them on via Profit Trends on YouTube. Matthew, welcome back, my friend.
Always my pleasure to be here.
Excellent. So let's give a little update. We're through Q1 of 2021. We're into April when we're recording this. We know New York has just announced that they are going legal. Let's start right there. What are your thoughts on New York, a huge state, obviously, going legal, and how that affects some of the companies we always talk about and just the general industry?
I mean, I think this was such a big move. It wasn't so super surprising. 2020 was a fantastic year for the cannabis industry. You had 5 states that expanded legalization on election night. As I've stated before, I thought no matter who won the White House on election day, cannabis would be the biggest winner. And that's what we saw. And then as we moved into 2021, I was still super excited and bullish about the industry because I felt we were really at this tipping point or this inflection point. And to start the year, I had forecast there would be a half dozen states that would expand legalization measures. My home state of Maryland would be one, as well as Connecticut, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Virginia, and New York. Right now, those aren't unsubstantial markets, right? There's all this tremendous pressure to recoup, the tax revenue and all the jobs due to the economic devastation triggered by the pandemic. Already into just after 3 months into 2021, 3 of those 6 states have legalized, Virginia, New York, and New Mexico. New York, I think, is probably the biggest, right? We're talking about a state that's home to, 20 million people. This is instantly a $1 billion market, probably more than double that within the next 5 years to over $2 billion. I also felt that with the move by New Jersey, New York was going to have to do something very quickly. And I think now that New Jersey and New York have done something, that puts pressure on Pennsylvania to actually make a move into adult use. So this to me is a very exciting time. And New York is one of those big dominoes to fall on the East Coast. I've talked about in the past that the East Coast has largely been these medicinal markets all the way up and down the coast. Just in the past years, that started to really switch. The West Coast, those are where you have your mature and adult use markets that are already sort of colored in over there. So this, I think, it will be that domino to really bring down and make sure that the rest of the states on the East Coast begin to follow that path towards legalization. And if I can just say what I think one of the reasons we're going to see that is if we look towards Illinois, right? Illinois just reported their March sales increased 35% over February. Now, a couple reasons for that. One, March is a longer month than February. There's also a little bit better weather in Illinois during that month. But the state brought in $109 million in sales. Of that, $109 million, $33 million was out-of-state customers. Almost a third of that coming from outside the state, and that was up from $23 million in February. So this is why it's so important for all of these states to go on this path towards legalization, because they are losing money to their neighbors. And New York is like I said, that's going to make a lot of those dominoes fall on the East Coast.
Yeah, I think there was definitely peer pressure. Like you said, once New Jersey went legal, there was a little peer pressure for New York. And the same thing you see with online gambling or sports gambling. Yep. Now that New Jersey went legal, people are just crossing the bridge and going over to New Jersey to place bets. You know what I mean? So that's going to be the same too. But it's a very interesting parallel to marijuana legalization as well. So what are some of the MSOs that have a presence in New York or are planning a big presence in New York? I would think a lot of them with such a big market.
Yeah. So right off the bat, Curaleaf is the number one operator in the state. That the company owns 25% of the entire market. So it's a huge player. 4 dispensaries operating in the state, 72,000 square feet of cultivation. But you have Cresco Labs. They also have 4 dispensaries. Verio Health, they have 4 dispensaries, and then Greenthumb with 3. So those are your top 4 players. You do see, I would imagine Curaleaf is still going to hold that pressure. I mean, Curaleaf is the number one operator in almost every state. More than 100 dispensaries across 23 states. It's a very big.
And why do you think like Curaleaf is, I think, still trading around what, $14 or give or take?
Yeah.
Do you think because it's an OTC stock and it's not listed on a major exchange that it's not gaining steam like some of the bigger players from Canada, like, that are a little higher priced or higher valuation, when Curaleaf, as the US goes legal, is going to be worth more than those companies you would think?
I mean, Curaleaf, you're talking about a company that just reported the first over $200 million in quarterly sales, the first cannabis company to do that. This year, it'll be the first cannabis company to report over $1 billion in sales. Now, it has a little bit larger float than, let's say, Greenthumb or Trulieve. Both of those trade at a higher price OTC. But I do think that OTC listing for for all of the American MSOs, really their price per share, because you don't have a lot of institutionals going in. I've talked to hedge funds in the past where, they can't touch the sector. And I think once you see something change at the federal level, which I do think you'll see this year, that's going to change. And the biggest thing for investors will be the fact that those companies will begin to uplist to a major exchange like the NYSE or the NASDAQ. That opens it up to a much broader investor audience. And then that fuels, more demand for those shares. So, when I first recommended Canopy years and years ago, when I first started covering the industry, that was trading OTC. My original recommendation was $7. A lot of those Canadian companies started to uplist, and that was within, I want to say, in the first 3 months, shares had doubled.
Yeah. Well, correct on what you just said. I guess. So my follow-up question to that is, you still believe a Curaleaf or the top dogs, Trulieve Greenthumb, they're still core holdings in someone's portfolio right now. They should be. And you're really just waiting for something to happen at the federal level, followed by uplisting, which allows all the money on the sidelines to jump in, which would raise share price. So at these levels, I know we saw a little pop a couple of months ago, then it's sunk back down a little bit in March. You're still holding these stocks or adding to them as they dip, knowing that the future is inevitable, whenever it may be, a year, 2 years, this year, whenever.
Yeah. So I always break the sector, especially the American sector, into majors and then kind of like these tier lowers. My majors in the US are Curaleaf, Trulieve, Greenthumb, Cresco. Right? Those are the big 4. If you want broad-based exposure, the largest company would be Curaleaf, then Trulieve, then Greenthumb. I also like Cresco. I think has a lot of pickup. Then that next tier down, that's where you have like Jushi, Columbia Care, Air Wellness, TerraSun. Those are that next wave. Planet 13. Those are those companies that don't have as Harvest Health and Recreation, maybe not as big of a headline number. Their sales aren't anywhere near that 100 million plus per quarter that the big 4 are doing. but they have a lot of growth. So this year, I think that second tier is very attractive. It may be maybe even a little bit more attractive for a longer term holder, because those majors, they all had their revenue double in 2020. They had these big, huge, massive increases. You had, the acquisition for Curaleaf with GR, which really, really helped propel that company higher. Their growth this year isn't going to be in those triple digits. It's still going to be very, very strong. That second tier lower, those companies didn't see triple digit growth in 2020, either because they were building out their footprint, working on their expansion. But this year, that's where they're really going to start making that jump forward. Like if you look at Jushi, you're talking about 180% revenue growth this year is what's projected. That's a big player in Pennsylvania. So I do like that market.
And the small, that second tier is also ripe to be acquired, as opposed to those big boys aren't going to be acquired. So could be a play there as well for an investor.
Yeah, and definitely. And that's something too that we kind of get into between Canadian LPs, licensed producers, and the American MSOs. There is a thought in the industry that the Canadian LPs, because federal legalization happened so quickly, let's say right off the bat in Canada, that those companies built up a lot of debt really, really quickly, right? You went out and you were like, acquire, making all these sorts of moves. And then that led into some into some issues. That's kind of what created the sell-off that we saw a couple of years ago. And for a lot of those companies, 2020 was a year where they were kind of doing management of their balance sheets. They're really trying to get debt under control. MSOs here in the US, most of them really aren't in anywhere near as bad of a situation, because they just don't have access to that capital. They don't have access to these financial markets. And
right, so they haven't gone into debt. They're actually turning profits here.
Yeah, and then, Trulieve is the most profitable, cannabis operator in the world at the moment. And so there's this other train of thought that in the industry that once something begins to happen at the federal level this year, which I do definitely believe the writing is on the wall for that, that's where you're going to see this renewed M&A push. And I think the deals will probably end up being record-breaking deals. Some companies here in the United States, they did over dilute, trying to continue to raise capital, but a lot of the companies like those big ones are still in a really good shape.
All right. So if you're not unlimited funds, if you're a limited fund investor, let's call it that, would you jump into like an ETF of the MSOs, like MSOS, I know is one of them that's pretty good. Or would you start trying to stock pick, since there's so many on that first tier and second tier, and some people can't afford to have, 12 or 15 stocks in their portfolio.
Right.
Tell the person that has a little bit of a limited budget to do like pick a first tier, pick a second tier, or just go with an ETF.
I will say the MSOS ETF is very attractive to me. I really do like. I'm not a huge fan of ETFs because I think you take the good with the bad, but because this industry is still very nascent, I think if you have maybe some limited funds, that's a place to start. If not, let's say if you wanted to spread it out a little bit, I would go with one of the majors. Like I said, like a Curaleaf, a Trulieve Greenthumb, even a Cresco. Curaleaf is, like I said, the largest footprint. And then maybe one of those second tier, like a company like a Jushi, a Harvest Health, or a Columbia Care, right? Those are, that would give you a lot of upside, a lot of growth, plus a lot of exposure to the entire U.S. market with one of those majors. And then, plus any sort of acquisitions that you have coming up.
Now let's just quickly hit on the big 3 or 4 in Canada. Canopy still looks like it's positioned the best for whatever happens in Canada and the US. Tilray and Aphria should be completing their merger in the second quarter, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then Aurora still on the outside with some debt issues, and they seem to be way far behind the other 2.
Yeah. So I think in Canada, again, go back to this quote where Bruce Linton several years ago said that, at the end of the day, there might be less than half a dozen cannabis companies. And I think when you look at Canada right now, the ones that are the most attractive to me, Canopy, the Aphria, Tilray, which will be trading under Aphria, and then maybe like a smaller player like Organigram, which they just secured that big, 200 million plus facility that they use to pay down debt. That's a much smaller player. I like those three. Aurora is still very confusing to me. I'm not quite sure what to.
Well, it's funny because every year with Aurora, you hear that they have to pay off their debt by X date, and then they somehow extend it and extend. They're just like pushing the deadline ahead, which is never a good sign.
It's bad. And there's so much, dilution, and then the reverses. It's so for me, I think right now my problem with them from a shareholder viewpoint is just the shares itself, like what's going on there. So that one I would kind of set aside for a while. And if you were looking for some sort of exposure, I would go with, Canopy, Aphria. Those are both I've loved a long time. Organigram.
Yeah. And then did you ever hear of High Tide?
High Tide, yeah. So it's a much smaller player.
Yes, they're profitable though. I've actually had that for a while. It was real cheap, and it's still a penny stock. But it's interesting because their numbers are pretty good for a small company, and I believe they have some exposure in the U.S. as well.
Oh, so is there exposure in the U.S.? I'm trying to remember what their exposure in the U.S. is.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I just wanted to see if you knew them, but I know they have they're a Canadian company, but they have exposure in the U.S. as well, which is positive, and they're profitable. So yeah, I probably should have gotten more details before asking you the question.
but I think there's some interesting players. I think when the market first legalized, there was a lot of really kind of unique concepts that began in Canada. I don't know that not all of them have panned out just because of the market. But I think you're seeing the cream of the crop rise to the top in that market.
And what about these crazy momentum up and down with the SPACs? So now there's some SPACs in cannabis that you're seeing. WeedMaps going public. There's some, Jay-Z is with, I forgot the name of the company he's with, but they're not catching on with investors very much.
Yeah, I think the WeedMaps IPO is interesting because that adds kind of another element to the industry, like when you get into these digital platforms like Akurna and so forth. The SPACs, I know a lot of SPACs are planning to do cannabis acquisitions this year. That's one of the big areas they intend to go after because of the momentum behind it. But you're right, there doesn't seem to be as much excitement for those acquisitions as, let's say, like space,
right,
or EVs. Where those markets really jump off, because I think a lot of the companies that have gone public in the U.S. are a really strong footprint. So I can use the sort of analogy that I get sort of reports from people about dispensaries and flowers and products at different brands across the country, and there is an argument between Curaleaf versus Trulieve versus Harvest, who is the best product, and it varies from state to state. Right now, you're entering kind of we're in the third wave of cannabis where there are aficionados. There is these connoisseurs, as you will, like the Snoop Dogg. We're going to enter into this next wave of it, and I think those established players are still very attractive to people.
Yeah, and so you're not worried about the short-term share price in any of these that we're speaking about. You're in it for the long term. You know that the catalysts are coming, whether it's legalization federally, medically, rec, whatever it may be. Yeah. The Safe Banking Act we can talk about in a second. You're not worried about short-term share price. You know that these are core holdings for you for long-term because toothpaste is out of the tube. It's happening at some point, and that's when you're going to benefit.
You can take Greenthumb recently, which had that big, massive drop on the Chicago Tribune article, which was a very weird article, I'll admit. It was kind of saying that there was a federal probe for Greenthumb because of campaign donations in relation to licenses.
Yes, I saw that as well. They got hit on a short term, but then it doesn't look like it's got much legs, right?
Yeah. So you had that big one-day drop, and then next day where Greenthumb was like, oh, they finally responded and said, they asked us about the probe. We said, we have no idea what you're talking about. This seems weird.
Right.
And they called out the reporters. You had that big bounce back higher. So I think the market, as an investor for cannabis, you do have to understand there are going to be some super volatile days because this is still a very young industry, and it is going to move on these negative pieces of news kind of more pronounced than any positive pieces of news. But you just have to embrace it. And I do think that long term, this is 5-10 years. A lot of these stocks you're going to feel comfortable holding.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the catalyst coming up. So the SAFE Banking Act, why don't you give a refresher to our listeners what that is? I know it's been reintroduced to Congress again. Give us a little update there.
So yeah, this has been reintroduced. This act basically makes it easier for cannabis companies to do business. In the past, this is a bill that cleared the House back in 2019, was stonewalled and installed in the Senate. I think you have a lot more momentum behind this bill this year because the Democrats control both the House and the Senate. Mitch McConnell, who's kind of like a proud obstructionist, is no longer a majority leader. So that allows these sort of bills to, one, get voted on, but also be debated and improved. So I think this is a very big piece of legislation from a financial standpoint. Right now, I know Schumer has talked that they're planning to legalize or move forward on legalization this year, regardless whether Biden is with them or not. Now, in their interviews that I've read from him, there's some other stuff that they're working on. He will not talk about whether it's decriminalization or legalization, what they're proposing. Legalization obviously would be much better as an investor.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But decriminalization, is a step forward. So I think
they don't seem to go in the fast lane. So I would assume that it will be decriminalization first, take their step, and then move from lane to lane. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think Chuck Schumer made a comment recently, which I do agree with. He was like, look, when a state like South Dakota votes to legalize, there is something changing, right? Attitudes have completely shifted, and basically the country has to recognize that. We have seen that since Colorado and Washington, legalized, the acceptance of legalization has increased by 20 percentage points. So we're now still right around 70% of the population believes in legalization. If you talk about medicinal, it goes all the way up to 90%. So for me, I think probably we'll see a move towards decriminalization, especially to kind of help with the arrests and sort of the incarceration numbers that you have to deal with and really take a hard look at. I think you'll see from a social justice reform, you'll see decriminalization first, and then probably I would imagine something on the medicinal side.
Yeah, it's ridiculous that there's almost 40 states now medically legal. Yeah, and that they're not federally legalizing, at least on the medicinal side. I can see if they want to wait on recreational until they have a little more data, that's fine. But I can't believe it's not federally legal, because then you allow interstate commerce, you allow businesses to grow, you allow different industries to get into it. There's more money on the sidelines. I'm just wondering, is Big Pharma that's lining the government's pockets holding that back because they're going to take a hit if legalization happens,
Yeah, that is always one of the kind of thoughts. I still believe that once, let's say, some change at the federal level happens, I think maybe the biggest threat to the cannabis industry will be from the pharmaceutical, because that will be where a major pharmaceutical comes in and starts going like, okay, well, we have deep pockets. So now, what Curaleaf is the largest multi-state operator, and we're talking about, less than a $10 billion market cap.
Oh yeah, it's pennies for like Philip Morris or Aphria. Yeah. Like you think Philip Morris doesn't have a whole bunch of land already ready to go with, you know what I mean? Like, or Amazon doesn't have drivers ready to go.
Yeah. So I think that's what you would see with maybe like a pharmaceutical industry, a company coming in and then buying up, acquisitions. Like that would be that to me is still kind of like, the outside looming threat that a major pharmaceutical company is going to come in and take out Curaleaf for a song for, let's say, 20 billion, right?
Right. Exactly. And it's same with the, so I mentioned delivery like an Amazon. So I know one of the smaller national delivery companies, Waiter Holdings, they just announced that they are going to be delivering marijuana in their markets. I'm wondering if like a Grubhub, a DoorDash starts adding to that before Amazon jumps in, before Uber weed begins, before Walmart start delivering weed. Like I wonder if the food delivery companies that already have the infrastructure to handle food in a quick, delivering in 30 minutes or whatever, can they do the same for marijuana, and how quickly that'll become the norm?
Like when that announcement from Waiter came out, I was like, well, that's an interesting piece, but I really think that like a DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub could really move into that market very, very quickly.
Oh, they're huge. So for a Waiter to do it, they're just so regional and small town. But for a Grubhub or a DoorDash to do it, man, they could just double their revenue in a day. It's the same drivers. It's not like you need to add anyone else. They're just going to a different place to pick something up.
So this is what I'll talk about. This is what's very fascinating and so what's fun about this industry and why I got involved in it when it first launched. Because I was like, this is a whole new ecosystem being born. And I'm always asked if investors are too late, right? If they've somehow missed the boat because of the run up, because of the headlines, because of the movements as we've seen it. And I like to point out the American cannabis demand is roughly $100 billion per year. Right now, legal cannabis accounts for $17.5 billion in 2020, right? And it's going to grow to more than $21 billion this year. That means the legal side of this business is less than a fifth of the total overall market opportunity. And so when we're talking about long-term things and all the things that are going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, that's why I talk about this being like an $80 billion market by 2030. A lot of people have it being now a $100 billion market by 2030 because of the pace of legalization. So this to me is like the Waiter announcement and everything that's going on. It's a very exciting time again to be in cannabis and to be a cannabis investor.
Yeah, I agree. All right. So before we finish up, we talked about the tier 1 and the tier 2. So if you're someone, you're only going to have the ability to invest in 2 stocks, one tier 1 and one tier 2. All right, let's do this, Matthew. Hold on. Tier 1, tier 2, give me one pick of each, and then give me a penny stock for somebody.
Tier 1, I'd go Curaleaf. Tier 2, I like Jushi right now just because of their exposure to Pennsylvania. And I think Pennsylvania is going to be the next domino to fall. And they're right behind Curaleaf in that state. Now on the penny stock side, let's see. A nice penny stock, those are always the toughest ones.
Oh, yeah. Because that's why they're penny stocks.
Yeah.
That's all right. You don't have to give us one, man.
Yeah. So I'll pass on the penny stock right now.
I like that I stumped you, finally.
Wait, well, here we go. Here's Cannabis Technologies. That is a company that does basically the breathalyzer.
Yes, I remember. I think we spoke about that once before. Correct. Yeah, they do a breathalyzer that law enforcement can use to see if you're basically DUI for weed, right?
Yeah. There you go.
Excellent. Well, Matthew Carr, Chief Trend Strategist for the Oxford Club. Follow him on YouTube, Profit Trends. Thank you so much for being our guest again, and we will definitely speak to you soon.
All right, thanks, Lynn. Always awesome.
All right, everyone, and we will see you next time on the Pot Live Podcast. Looking for the best deals on all of your favorite CBD products? Check out the #1 rated online shop at cbddeals.net to find dozens of brands offering amazing deals for your wellness needs.